viewers, and welcome to today's discussion. Subscribe and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up by tapping on the like button, and feel free to be part of this conversation. Now today we're going to be looking at a complex wave of geopolitical tensions and military interventions that are shaping our world today. From the Sahel region of Africa to the conflict in Ukraine, and from the war on terror to the rise of multipolar alliances, we are going to explore the motivations and interests behind the actions of global powers. Now in this video, a lady is joined by expert analyst Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tri-Continental Institute for Social Research and author of several books on CIA, coups and assassinations. Together, they examine the reasons behind the military presence of France and the United States in Niger, the expansion of NATO into Africa, and the implications of the U.S. demand for countries to choose sides in the new Cold War. Now, from the policing of the Sahara border to the destruction of Libya and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we will connect the dots between these seemingly disparate events and reveal the larger pattern of global hegemony and resistance. So with that said, let's get into the video, explore the hidden agendas and power struggles that are shaping our world today. I will be right back.
Let's take the case of Niger. It has become clear to the people of Niger that the reason the French and the United States have military bases in Niger is not really to fight Al-Qaeda, it's not really about security issues and so on, but it's for two other issues. Number one, they are there because they are policing the Sahara border. Europe wants its border to be south of the Sahara, not north of the Mediterranean. And that's the reason why they have heavily...
We know that NATO expansion provoked the war in Ukraine, but surrounding Russia isn't NATO's only pursuit. NATO participated in the US war on terror in Afghanistan. NATO destroyed Libya. And today, NATO is trying to expand into Africa. This comes as the US is drawing a line in the sand and demanding that countries in the global south pick a side. You're either with the West and its never-ending wars to maintain global hegemony, or you're with Russia and China. And those who choose wrong or stay neutral are being propagandized, bullied, and threatened with sanctions, no more so than countries in Africa. To help break it all down, I'm joined by Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tri-Continental Institute for Social Research and author of many books, including Washington Bullets, A History of the CIA, Coups and Assassinations. Vijay, welcome.
Thanks a lot. Great to be with you.
It's like, even though this military expansion is taking place, the U.S. and the Western countries are in many ways at the moment losing in Africa in the long term. Mali, something you've written about, Mali just kicked out French troops, for example. And then, of course, half the African countries abstained or voted against the UN resolution condemning Russia. And then Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on this Africa tour, or just after Russia's Lavrov, to try to convince African countries to stop buying Russian commodities like grain and wheat and fertilizer, even if it starves them. The U.S. seems to be in a very weak position at the moment, despite this military expansion over the war in Ukraine.
It's complicated, I know it's horrible to hear that phrase, it's complicated, but it is pretty complicated. So there is, I think, a new mood appearing on the African continent among the 55 heads of government. Not all of them, obviously, not the King of Morocco and so on. But in many places, there's a new mood appearing. Let's take the case of Niger. It has become clear to the people of Niger that the reason the French and the United States have military bases in Niger is not really to fight Al-Qaeda, it's not really about security issues and so on, but it's for two other issues. Number one, they are there because they are policing the Sahara border. Europe wants its border to be south of the Sahara, not north of the Mediterranean. And that's the reason why they have heavily policed countries like Niger, which are a pathway into Libya. Secondly, in the town of Arlit, which is in the northern part of Niger, it's the home of yellow cake uranium. Something like 75% of the households in France have their light bulbs powered by the uranium from Niger. It's very clear that the reason Arlit is garrisoned by the French troops isn't for human rights, but it's for uranium. So there's a growing sense in much of the continent. We saw that in Mali, the protests against the French military occupation, and then the French had to actually leave Mali because the second military coup chucked them out. There's a growing mood among people that the military occupation in this part of the world is largely based on the principle of raw materials. But the other side of it, which I think is quite important, quite key, not just about raw materials, is that there's a feeling that countries just don't want to be bullied around anymore. And I think that's the reason when the African Union was under pressure by the United States to hold a talk by Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, only 2 actual heads of state came to that Zoom meeting. And in fact, around the time, just before Zelensky came to meet the African Union, in other words, only 2 countries came for that meeting. Just before that, the leaders of the African Union went to Sochi to meet Vladimir Putin. So there's a kind of complicated situation. But at the same time, Rania, I wouldn't want to exaggerate this too much, because the United States still has a very large military footprint. As I said, 29 military bases. The United States, yet using the International Monetary Fund, has a great position in terms of development financing on the continent. These things are also there. So countries are trying to navigate the situation, but there is definitely a new mood growing on the continent.
Now, this video sheds light on the geopolitical tensions and military interventions that are shaping our world. Just like we've heard from the speakers that have raised critical points about the true intentions behind the military presence of France and the United States in Niger and the expansion of NATO into Africa. Firstly, the man highlighted that the French and US military bases in Niger are not solely for security reasons, but also for policing the Sahara border. This is a crucial point, as Europe's border security policies have long been criticized for prioritizing containment over human rights. By controlling the Sahara border, Europe aims to prevent migration and maintain its borders south of the Sahara, rather than addressing the root causes of migration. Now, the latest speaker further expanded on this, pointing out that NATO's expansion into Africa is part of a broader strategy to maintain global hegemony. She noted that NATO's involvement in the US war on terror in Afghanistan, the destruction of Libya, and its current expansion into Africa are all part of this agenda. Now, this is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of military interventions and the need for critical examination of global powers' actions. Vijay Prashad, the expert analyst, brings a wealth of knowledge to the discussion. Drawing on his research into CIA coups and assassinations, his insights into the historical context of US interventions and the current geopolitical landscape provide a crucial framework for understanding the motivations behind these actions. Now, this video also highlights the US demand for countries to choose sides in the new Cold War and the implications of these for the global south. Now, this is a critical point, as countries that refuse to align with the US or NATO are often subject to propaganda, bullying, and sanctions, just like the speakers have said. Now, this is evident in the treatment of countries like Russia, China, and Venezuela, which have faced intense pressure and sanctions in refusing to conform to US demands. Now, this is what happened. As the Soviets tightened their grip in Eastern Europe, the United States embarked on a policy of containment to prevent the spread of Soviet and communist influence in Western European nations such as France, Italy, and Greece. Now, during the 1940s, the United States reversed its traditional reluctance to become involved in European affairs. The Truman Doctrine 1947 pledged aid to governments threatened by communist subversion. The Marshall Plan 1947 provided billions of dollars in economic assistance to eliminate the political instability that could open the way for communist takeovers of democratically elected governments. Now, France, England, and the United States administered sectors of the city of Berlin deep inside communist East Germany. When the Soviets cut off all road and rail traffic to the city in 1948, the United States and Great Britain responded with a massive airlift that supplied the besieged city for 231 days until the blockade was lifted. In 1949, the United States joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, the first mutual security and military alliance in American history, and the establishment of NATO also spurred the Soviet Union to create an alliance with the communist governments of Eastern Europe Europe that was formalized in 1955 by the Warsaw Pact. Now, in Europe, the dividing line between East and West remained essentially frozen during the next decades, but conflict spread to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The struggle to overthrow colonial regimes frequently became entangled in Cold War tensions, and the superpowers competed to influence anti-colonial movements. In 1949, the communists triumphed in the Chinese Civil War, and the world's most populous nation joined the Soviet Union as a Cold War adversary. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United Nations and the United States sent troops and military aid. Communist China intervened to support North Korea, and bloody campaigns stretched on for 3 years until a truce was signed in 1953. In 1954, the colonial French regime fell in Vietnam. The United States supported a military government in South Vietnam and worked to prevent free elections that might have unified the country under the control of communist North Vietnam. In response to the threat, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization was formed in 1955 to prevent communist expansion, and President sent some 700 military personnel as well as military and economic aid to the government of South Vietnam. The effort was foundering when John F. Kennedy took office. Now, we can go on and on, but in short, this video highlights the critical need for a nuanced understanding of the complex geopolitical landscape and the motivations behind global powers' actions. The expansion of NATO into Africa, the military presence in Niger, and the demand for countries to choose sides in the new Cold War are all interconnected aspects of a broader strategy to maintain global hegemony. We have finally come to the end of the video. What do you have to say? Share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.